So hey all, this is one that's been requested several times and I figured we should finally get around to talking about it. Light mapping. What it is, what it means to you, and the best ways to work with it. So as 3D artists, we know what light maps are. We've been dealing with them for years. But if I'm pressed to put a definition to them, I would say light maps are a concession that 3D artists have to make because rendering software and rendering hardware are not powerful enough to light games in real time yet. Not fully, anyway. So until that time arrives, we have to deal with light maps. And if we're going to deal with light maps, we might as well do it correctly. So I know this will come off a little basic to those who are experienced, but I figure we should talk about what a light map actually is before talking about how to approach one. A light map is basically a texture that the game engine is creating for each instance of your prop that represents the static lighting that's on that prop. So this is the UV unwrap window inside of Modo, and the grid spacing is set to 10, or whatever. There's 10 squares across here, so there's 10 across and 10 down. Now, if you're inside of Unreal Engine 4 and you tell your prop that you have a light map resolution of 10, that means you're asking for a 10 by 10 texture to hold the lighting for that prop. So the UVs you unwrap for the light map will sit on this 10 by 10 texture, and that's where it gets the lighting from. Now with that realization, you know that a 10 by 10 texture is not a very large texture. So this is what happens when you put an actual prop on this. So this is an actual prop that I had done previously, and looking at the light map here, you can see that if I give this a 10 by 10 texture, then this big chunk here, which is this is a cast iron stove prop, so this big thing up here represents like the top of the stove. So there's this is fitting into 3 pixels across and 3 pixels down, and that's all the information you're going to have to hold the lighting for that surface. So that's where the different resolutions of light maps come in, and you have to weigh the quality against the memory cost, against the blah blah, and when the programmers yell at you, you have to dial it down. So here's that same prop, but I've changed the grid spacing so it's 100 pixels across and 100 pixels down. Now zooming into that same chunk up here, you can see that we've got a lot more resolution. There's a lot more little pixels going across there, and that's more than enough resolution to capture information in game, like shadows being cast across this, or hotspot lighting, or whatever's going on, right? But usually you'll have to pick some sort of a compromise between super low res and what you want. And that kind of depends on your games, on your texture budgets, and that sort of thing. The last techie point I would say to keep in mind is that generally what happens behind the scenes is in game engines, let's say you have a whole bunch of little props and they're all using like an 8x8 light map or something. The engine won't keep a whole bunch of individual 8x8 light maps. It will pack them all onto large textures. Like, I don't actually know how big they are, but say like a 1024 texture can hold a whole lot of these 8x8 textures on it. So it'll create an atlas texture of all your little light maps. But when you start throwing things like, oh, I'm going to make a light map that's 256 by 256. Sounds great, but you're eating up like 1/8 of the atlas. So, like I say, it's a balancing act. So light maps only have a couple of rules. The primary one being that all of your UV islands have to be laid out uniquely, and they have to be laid out entirely within the 0 to 1 space of the first UV mapping cell, for lack of a better term. Basically, that means you can't go outside of that first square of UV spacing. And you can't have any overlapping, you can't have any mirroring, none of that. They all have to have their own unique space on the light map. So the other rule for light mapping is that you have to watch your padding. And there's 2 kinds of padding. There's padding between UV islands, and there's padding from the edges of the UV space. So it's even worse than you thought. Basically, when textures get blurred inside the game engine and and UV islands are too close together, the problem you're going to have is that the colors from this island are going to bleed over into this island. Now sometimes that's not noticeable on the base texture, but it's really noticeable on your light map, because what'll happen is you'll have some brightly lit island here and some dark island here. And when this one blurs, this one gets some lighting on the edges of it, or like kind of leaning over on it. And then your prop in the game engine has lighting in some weird spot, and you're like, where is that coming from? It's coming from bleeding. You don't have enough padding between your UV islands. The other one that catches people out, and it catches me sometimes too because I forget to do it, but you got to watch the edges of your UV space, because if your islands are pushed right up against the edge of the UV space, and you have an island here and an island here, let's use the window here. So there's an island here and an island here, and this one's bright and this one's dark. This edge is going to bleed over into this edge, which is going to cause the edge of this island to light up. And it's the same problem, right? So depending on the resolution of the light map you're going to use, you have to use the appropriate amount of padding between the islands. And I've come up with a pretty good system for figuring this out. It's not like I'm doing it uniquely for every mesh, but we'll get to that in a bit. What I've done is I've made up a bunch of little light map textures, basically. And you can see one in the background here. This is an 8x8 light map template that I made. I just went into Photoshop, made a bunch of alternate color squares that I can pull into Modo, throw in the background, and see exactly where my lighting textiles are going to fall, right? And you can see the same thing I talked about before. There's a 3x3 here and all that kind of stuff. But if you make a whole bunch of different sizes, you can try out different light maps on the prop. Like, let me drag over the 16x16 and drop that in there. You can see the resolution has increased. You know, there's more textiles, but it's still not, you know, wonderful. But this might be what you end up shipping with. This is, well, who knows, right? But the point is, you can make these little templates up, and here's a 128 by 128. And you can see there's a lot more resolution in this one. So I find that these little templates can help you to line up the UV islands. Like, say you want to be sure that this island is, you know, has a clean edge or something, right? So you can go in here and say, okay, well, make sure he's sitting here, because then he's right on this row and he's right on this row. Just something to keep in mind. It's a tool you can use or not use. I actually don't tend to use this much anymore, because I pack that to pack my light map up, and that's worked relatively well for me. And I'll show you how that works here in a second. One thing I forgot to mention is that making up those light map templates is also beneficial, because you can not only see it, you know, on your unwrap, obviously, but you can also see it right on the mesh when you're in your modeling app. So this is my 128 by 128 template that's sitting on my prop, and you can see exactly where those lighting samples are going to fall on the mesh. You can do this inside of you know, Unreal Ed as well by using the light map view that we'll get to in a second. But yeah, I forgot to show this, and I felt that I should. So if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know that I'm a huge fan of I pack that for packing UVs. There's just no substitute in my mind. When I'm packing my normal textures, like what you see here, this is an I pack that pack that got done, you know, a long time ago. What I do is I set the resolution to 2048 and just use the default padding that shows up here, the 16 and the 0. That works out great for normal textures. When it comes to light maps, though, what I find works really well is to set the resolution down to 256 and hit apply resolution. That drops the margin size to 2. I will then manually do an increase on the border size and move that up to 2 as well. This configuration, and I'm just going to run it here. You'll see it here in a second. You'll watch the UV shift, and you'll see they all come in a little bit and they all get further apart. The padding that this generates tends to work out great for me. I can make the light map larger in game or smaller in game, and it typically holds up pretty well. And since, you know, I'm using iPack that, it's more or less automated, you know, which is super helpful. And we'll see here in a second. You see what it did there? It popped in, The islands all have a good amount of space between them, and with the proper resolution light map, I'm not going to have bleeding or problems. Yeah, and you can always play with that, right? Let's make it bigger. Let's do it like 4 and 4 and run that real quick and just see what that turns out like. But the amount of padding you're going to need is really going to be dependent on your game engine and, like I said earlier, on your texture resolution budget and that kind of thing. But let's see what the 4:4 does here. And yes, you can see they're all spaced out even more. So if the 2:2 is not giving you what you need, then dial it up to a 4:4 or even higher if you want to. iPack that will automate the process. Now, what iPack that is not doing is it's not aligning islands to texels. Like I showed you with the UV template in the back here, right? It's not doing that, but it is doing a very adequate job in laying out the majority of the light map for you. So I suggest using it, as I always do. So one thing to keep in mind when you're unwrapping your light maps is you're going to make some choices differently than you do when you're doing your normal textures. So pretend this beveled box is a real prop. Pretend this is some sort of a computer panel shoved in a corner or whatever. And you needed this front face here to be ripped off separately on the UV map. You can see it over here. That needed to be torn off separately, because that's how you needed to make your normal map. There was something with the edge there and it required a break. That works great on the normal map, but let me turn on my Lightmap template here. If you use the same scheme for your Lightmap template, your Lightmap will sit on the faces like this. And the problem you've got here is that this area here looks fine, right? Where you've got the whole texel showing up, but it doesn't look fine. Let me turn it on over here too so we can see it. But it doesn't look fine over here on this edge, for example, right? Because you've got this weird like sliver showing through, and this sliver is not going to light correctly. That's going to probably end up with a black stripe down the side of that panel, and you can see there's some bleeding up here. And even if you go in here and fuss with it and align this, right onto some texels, it helps, but it doesn't fix everything. And as opposed to going in and hand tweaking every single island, the better way to do it is just to do the unwrap differently. And real simply, all that means is, let's say that I was going to unwrap this prop, I would probably grab all 3 of these faces and just map them together planar, right? And then if I redo the packing now, and we zoom in here, we can see this is all one UV island now. And these texels, they all wrap around perfectly fine, and there won't be any weird break on this surface. This will be one contiguous light chunk. And that's really all I had to say about that, but it does cause people confusion sometimes because they think that they can just, like Unreal Engine 4 has the auto generator for light maps, and the auto generator works well for what it is, but unfortunately all it's doing when you break it down is it's taking your existing unwrap, copying it to the second channel, and just doing an auto pack on it, which can work, but in situations like this it's not going to help you. So I really do recommend making your light maps by hand. Perhaps not on every prop, but on the stuff that's big or stuff that you'll notice errors on, I would definitely do it by hand. It just looks better and it's more professional. So one last thing I'd like to talk about is when you're doing modular assets, like modular walls or that kind of thing that need to, like wall chunks that need to butt up against each other. That tends to be tricky for people when they want to use light maps because obviously that those edges, any kind of weirdness there is going to show up as a shading change or just a straight up black edge or or whatever. And it's for the reasons we just talked about, right? Stuff's not mapped contiguously, but it's tricky because Let's say this is one of those modular wall chunks here, and this is like, this edge is the one, that falls between the wall segments when they're laid out. And you think to yourself, okay, well, there's a weird black edge here. So I'll just grab those and I'll map them together, right? Which seems natural to do. And you're like, yay, that's fixed. But it's not, because yes, this is all unwrapped nice and smoothly, but unfortunately, the lighting is going to bend around this corner and bleed around this corner. So even though this lights contiguously, it lights wrong still, and you will get seams. The way that I've come to fix that is, what you need to do is leave them separate the way you've got them, but just make sure that use your UV template, and just make sure that the UVs fall nicely within the boundaries of the template, because you know where the light texels are going to be. Like, where the sample points are, so you go in here and manipulate them, and make sure they're falling right on pixels nice and evenly. Pull this up. Okay. Now when you zoom into this corner, you can see these are separate. They're shaded separately, and they're separate islands on the UV map. But they're whole texels that hit the edge and whole texels that hit the edge here. That's not going to bleed on you. And that's really it. But it's different from normal unwraps, and it does require a little hand massaging. So I thought I would throw that in. So to finish up, I went ahead and imported an example mesh into Unreal Engine 4. Now the mesh on the left is UV mapped in the bad way that we talked about. It's got all three of these front faces are separated onto their own islands. And the second one over here has the contiguous unwrap that we talked about that was good, right? Now before I show you the lighting results on these, what I'd like to do is to show you how to look at the light map within Unreal Ed. So if you just pull down this menu here that has your display options, and go to optimizations, go to Lightmap Density, and turn that on. That'll actually show you the texels that are on your light map right in the viewport. So you can fly around the level and look at the meshes. You can see they're colorized as well. So when they're red, they're super dense, and when they're blue, they're pretty large and spread out. Typically, when shipping games, we try to aim for something in this aqua range. That tends to be a nice balance because it takes into account the scale of the mesh and the size of the texture and all that. So try to aim for the aqua green. The blue is better to show off this error though, so I left it at blue. So if I turn on the actual lighting, you can see what happens here, right? My contiguous unwrap has the shadow from this overhead bar hitting it, and it flows nicely right across the surface, and there's no weirdnesses going on. And if you look at the one that's all separated out, it's a hot mess. There's like gaps and cracks and all kinds of things going on. So this is that's why it's important to manage your light map UVs, because if you don't take care of them, nobody else is gonna. So before I go, I wanted to clarify one thing. When I imported that mesh into Unreal Ed, it turns out I don't think Unreal Ed is actually computing lighting right at the center of these texels like I said it was. And I think that's an artifact of the Atlas packing that I talked about, where it takes all the little light maps and jams them onto a big light map and all that. So I think things tend to shift around just slightly when you're doing that. Because my initial pack when I had it done was lined up right on the top edge of these texels, and it didn't look like that when I got it inside of Unreal Ed. And so I had to jigger this around so it was sort of laying halfway through the texels to get it to light in the way that I wanted it to light. So be aware that if things don't look correct, you may have to do a little hand massaging. But the rules in this video all still apply. It's just a matter of if you're on the kind of mesh that's fussy enough that requires you to hand edit it, and you may be in for a little extra work. That's all. It's no biggie. So yeah, Just passing that little warning along. So I think that's all I'm going to say about light maps today. It's a bit of an art form. You really have to get in there and just start experimenting to get the best results out of it. But yeah, if you follow the rules in this video, you'll be okay most of the time. If there's something I said that sounds weird or confusing, or something I didn't say at all that you want to know about, leave a comment down below, and I'll try to get to it if I know the answer, or I know where you can find the answer at least. So thanks, and let's hope that light maps go away in the next generation of renderers. Fingers crossed.